The alarm clock screamed at 5:30 a.m., but Maya was already awake. She had been staring at the ceiling for the past hour, calculating numbers in her head. Rent was due in 3 days. Her brother's college payment was coming up next week. The electricity bill sat unopened on her kitchen table because she was afraid to see how much it was this month. Maya rolled out of bed and looked at herself in the cracked mirror hanging on her bedroom wall. Her uniform was clean and pressed, just like every day. She had learned long ago that appearance mattered, especially when you worked at a place like Grandview Restaurant. The customers there had money, lots of it, and they expected everything to be perfect. She grabbed her worn-out shoes and headed to the kitchen. Coffee was a luxury she couldn't afford every day, but today felt like she needed it. As the old coffee maker gurgled to life, Maya thought about her grandmother. It had been 3 years since she passed away, but Maya still missed her every single day. "You got music in your soul, baby girl," her grandmother used to say while teaching Maya to play. The old upright piano in their living room. Don't you ever let nobody tell you different. That piano was gone now, sold along with most of their furniture when Maya had to move to this tiny apartment. But she could still remember every lesson, every song, every gentle correction her grandmother gave her. The bus ride to work took 45 minutes. Maya used this time to prepare herself mentally for the day ahead. Working at Grandview wasn't easy. The customers were demanding, the managers were strict, and the work never seemed to end. But it paid better than most places, and Maya needed every dollar she could get. Her brother David was in his second year of college studying to become a teacher. He was smart, smarter than Maya had ever been in school, and she was determined to make sure he graduated. Their parents had died in a car accident when David was only 15. Maya was 21 then, and she became his guardian overnight. "I can get a job," David had said when they were struggling to pay his first semester fees. "I can help." "No," Maya had told him firmly. "Your job is to study. Let me worry about the money." The restaurant was already busy when Maya arrived at 6:30 a.m. The morning shift was always hectic. Business people wanted their coffee fast and their breakfast faster. Maya tied her apron and got to work. "Table 12 needs their order taken," called out Rita, the other waitress working the morning shift. Rita had been at Grandview for 8 years and knew every regular customer by name. Maya grabbed her notepad and headed to table 12. A man in an expensive suit was tapping his fingers impatiently on the table while talking loudly on his phone. He barely looked at Maya as she approached. "I'll have the usual," he said, not even pausing his phone conversation. Maya had no idea what his usual was. She had only been working at Grandview for 6 months, and she didn't recognize this customer. "Excuse me, sir," she said politely. "Could you please tell me what you'd like to order?" The man looked annoyed. "The eggs Benedict with extra hollandaise, whole wheat toast, and fresh orange juice. And make it quick. I have a meeting in 30 minutes." Maya wrote it down quickly and hurried to the kitchen. This was how most mornings went. Rush, rush, rush. Customers who treated her like she was invisible until they needed something. Managers who expected perfection but paid minimum wage plus tips. The lunch shift was different. The restaurant transformed into something more elegant. The lights were dimmed, soft music played in the background, and the customers dressed like they were going to fancy parties. This was when Maya noticed the piano. It sat in the center of the dining room, a beautiful black grand piano that looked like it cost more than Maya made in a year. Sometimes, during quiet moments, she would find herself staring at it. Her fingers would twitch, remembering the feeling of keys beneath them. "Stop daydreaming and clear table 6, her manager would say, snapping Maya back to reality. But Maya couldn't help herself. The piano called to her. She wondered what it would sound like, how the keys would feel under her fingers. She wondered if she still remembered all the songs her grandmother had taught her. During her break, Maya would sometimes sit at the staff table in the back of the restaurant where she could still see the piano. She would eat her sandwich and imagine playing it. In her mind, she could hear her grandmother's voice. "Music is medicine for the soul, baby girl. When the world gets heavy, you sit down at those keys and let it all out." The afternoon brought a different crowd. Wealthy women having lunch meetings talking about charity events and vacation homes. Business deals discussed over expensive wine. Maya served them all with a smile, even when they treated her badly. "This coffee is cold," one woman complained, even though Maya had just poured it from a fresh pot. "I'm sorry, ma'am, I'll get you a new cup right away," Maya replied, keeping her voice pleasant. "And next time, pay attention to what you're doing," the woman added rudely. Maya bit her tongue and went to get fresh coffee. She had learned not to react when customers were rude. Getting upset wouldn't change anything, and she couldn't afford to lose this job. As the day wore on, Maya's feet started to ache. The cheap shoes she wore weren't meant for standing and walking for 12 hours straight. But she kept going, refilling, water glasses, taking orders, clearing tables, and always smiling. The dinner shift was the busiest time of all. The restaurant filled with couples on dates, families celebrating special occasions, and business people impressing their clients. The kitchen was hot and loud. Orders came in fast, and everyone was stressed. Maya moved quickly between tables, balancing plates on her arms and remembering complicated orders. She had gotten good at this job, even though she never planned to be a waitress. Before her parents died, she had dreams of going to music school, maybe becoming a piano teacher like her grandmother. But life had other plans. During a brief, quiet moment, Maya found herself standing near the piano again. She looked around to make sure no one was watching, then gently touched one of the keys. It made a soft, beautiful sound that seemed to echo in her chest. "Hey, what are you doing?" Maya jumped and turned around. Her manager was standing behind her looking annoyed. "I'm sorry," Maya said quickly. I was just cleaning around the piano." "Well, clean somewhere else. And hurry up. Table 15 is waiting for their dessert order." Maya's cheeks burned with embarrassment as she hurried away from the piano. She couldn't afford to get in trouble at work. Too many people depended on her. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of orders and dirty dishes. By the time the restaurant closed at 11 p.m., Maya was exhausted. Her feet hurt, her back ached, and she smelled like food and cleaning supplies. But she had made good tips today. She counted the money carefully on the bus ride home. It was enough to cover the rent with a little left over. Maybe she could even buy David those textbooks he needed. When Maya finally got home, her apartment was dark and quiet. David was already asleep, and she could see his homework spread out on the kitchen table. He was working so hard in school, and Maya was proud of him. She sat down on her small couch and finally allowed herself to think about the piano again. In her mind, she could still hear that single note she had played. It had sounded perfect, just like she remembered music sounding when her grandmother was alive. Maya closed her eyes and imagined sitting at that beautiful piano, playing all the songs she kept locked away in her memory. For just a moment, she allowed herself to dream about a different life, a life where music was more than just a memory. But dreams didn't pay the bills, and tomorrow would bring another long day at Grandview Restaurant. Saturday night at Grandview Restaurant was always the busiest night of the week. Maya had worked 3 double shifts this week already, but she needed the overtime money. David's textbooks were more expensive than they had expected, and the electricity bill had been higher than usual. The restaurant was packed with well-dressed customers. Maya moved quickly between tables, her notepad full of complicated orders. The kitchen was running behind, which meant angry customers and stressed servers. Maya tried to stay positive, but she could feel the tension building. At 8:30 p.m., a group of 5 men walked into the restaurant. They were loud even before they sat down, talking and laughing in a way that made other customers turn and look. The hostess seated them at table 7, right next to the piano. Maya watched from across the room as the men settled into their seats. They all wore expensive suits and watches that probably cost more than Maya made in 6 months. The man who seemed to be their leader was tall, with gray hair, and a face that looked like he was used to getting whatever he wanted. "Maya, you've got table 7, called out Rita, who was busy with her own section. Maya took a deep breath and walked over to the table. The men were already drinking wine that they had brought themselves, which meant they were important customers. The restaurant only allowed wine service like this for their biggest spenders. "Good evening, gentlemen," Maya said with her best smile. "Welcome to Grandview. Can I start you off with some appetizers tonight?" The gray-haired man looked up at her with cold eyes. We'll have the seafood platter, the cheese board, and keep the wine coming. And make sure the glasses are actually clean this time. Last week, I had to send mine back twice. Maya wrote down the order, trying to ignore the rude comment. Of course, sir. I'll get that started for you right away. As she turned to leave, she heard one of the men say, Richard, you're being too nice to the help. They need to know their place. Richard. So that was the gray-haired man's name. Maya pretended not to hear the comment and walked to the kitchen to place their order. The appetizers came out quickly, but Maya could tell the men were already getting louder. They had finished 2 bottles of wine and ordered a third. Other customers were starting to look annoyed by their noise. Excuse me, miss, Richard called out when Maya brought their 3rd bottle of wine. His voice was louder now, and other people in the restaurant could hear him. This wine is warm. Don't you people know how to store wine properly? Maya felt her cheeks get hot. The wine wasn't warm. She had just taken it from the wine cooler, but she kept her voice calm and professional. I'm sorry about that, sir. Let me get you a fresh bottle from our coldest storage. You do that, Richard said, then turned to his friends. It's so hard to find good help these days. They just don't care about quality anymore. Maya hurried to the kitchen, trying not to let his words bother her. She had dealt with difficult customers before. The key was to stay professional and not take anything personally. But when she returned with the new bottle of wine, things got worse. Finally, Richard said loudly, Now let's see if you can pour it without spilling it everywhere. Maya poured the wine carefully into each glass. Her hands were steady and she didn't spill a single drop. But Richard wasn't finished. You know, he said, speaking loud enough for the whole restaurant to hear. I bet you people have all kinds of hidden talents. What do you do when you're not serving tables? Sing? Dance? His friends laughed, and Maya felt her stomach drop. She knew where this conversation was going, and she didn't like it. I just work here, sir, Maya said quietly, hoping he would drop the subject. But Richard was just getting started. He had noticed Maya looking at the piano earlier in the evening, and now he had an idea for entertainment. I saw you staring at that piano over there, he said, pointing across the room. Do you play? I bet you think you can play. The restaurant was getting quieter. Other customers were starting to pay attention to what was happening at table 7. Maya felt like everyone was staring at her. I need to check on my other tables, Maya said, trying to leave. Wait a minute, Richard said, his voice getting louder. I'm talking to you. Don't walk away from me. Maya stopped and turned back around. She could feel her heart beating faster. This was exactly the kind of situation she tried to avoid at work. I asked you a question, Richard continued. Can you play the piano or not? A little, Maya said quietly, hoping that would end the conversation. Richard's eyes lit up with an idea that made Maya's stomach turn. A little? Well, that's perfect. Why don't you go over there and play something for us? I'm sure we'd all love to hear what kind of music you people play. His friends started laughing and encouraging him. Come on, Richard, one of them said. Let the girl do what she's paid to do. But this could be fun, Richard said, standing up from his chair. Now he was talking loud enough for the entire restaurant to hear. I'll tell you what, sweetheart. You go over there and play us a song and I'll give you $100. That's probably more than you make in tips all night. Maya felt like the whole restaurant was watching her. Some customers looked uncomfortable, but no one said anything. Even her manager was standing in the corner watching to see what would happen. Sir, I really need to get back to work, Maya said, trying one more time to get out of the situation. Work? Richard laughed. This is work. I'm a customer and I'm asking for entertainment. Isn't the customer always right? His friends were all watching now, some of them holding up their phones like they wanted to record what happened next. Maya realized they expected her to embarrass herself. They thought it would be funny to watch her fail. Come on, Richard said, walking toward the piano. Don't be shy, I'm sure you're very talented. The way he said the word talented made it clear he didn't think she had any talent at all. Maya felt anger building up inside her chest, but she tried to push it down. She couldn't afford to lose her temper at work. Other customers were whispering, to each other now. Some looked embarrassed by Richard's behavior, but others seemed curious to see what would happen. Maya felt trapped between all these watching eyes. "I'll make it $150, Richard announced to the whole restaurant. "This lovely young lady is going to play piano for us. Isn't that right?" Maya looked around the restaurant. Her manager was still watching from the corner, but he wasn't going to help her. The other servers were busy with their own tables. She was completely alone in this situation. The money would help so much. $150 was more than she usually made in tips on a busy night. She could buy David those textbooks and still have money left over for groceries, but she knew Richard wasn't offering the money because he wanted to hear good music. He was offering it because he expected her to embarrass herself. He wanted to watch her fail so he and his friends could laugh about it. Maya's grandmother's voice echoed in her head. "You got music in your soul, baby girl. Don't you ever let nobody tell you different." But standing here in front of all these people, with Richard smirking at her and his friends holding up their phones, Maya wasn't sure if her grandmother's words were enough. "Well," Richard said impatiently. "Do you want the money or not? I don't have all night." Maya looked at the piano, then back at Richard, then at all the faces watching her. She had never felt so small and powerless in her entire life. But she also had never needed money more desperately than she did right now. Slowly, Maya started walking toward the piano. Maya's legs felt like they were made of jelly as she walked toward the piano. Every step seemed to take forever, and she could feel dozens of eyes watching her every movement. The restaurant had gone quiet except for the soft clinking of glasses and the distant sound of kitchen noise. Her mind was racing with 1,000 thoughts at once. What if she had forgotten how to play? It had been 3 years since she last touched a piano. What if her fingers didn't remember the songs her grandmother had taught her? What if she really did embarrass herself in front of all these people? But then she thought about David, probably studying late into the night at his dorm room. She thought about the textbooks he needed, the ones that cost more than she made in a week. She thought about the electricity bill sitting on her kitchen table and the rent that was due in 2 days. $150. It was more money than she had ever been offered for anything in her life. Behind her, Richard was still talking to his friends, his voice carrying across the quiet restaurant. "This should be entertaining," he said with a laugh. "I bet she plays chopsticks or something equally impressive." His friends chuckled, and Maya heard one of them say, "I've got my phone ready. This is going to be hilarious." Maya stopped walking. She was only a few feet away from the piano now, close enough to see her reflection in its shiny black surface. She looked tired and small in her wrinkled uniform, surrounded by all these well-dressed people who had probably never worried about paying rent or buying groceries. For a moment, she considered turning around and walking away. She could tell Richard she had changed her mind, go back to serving tables and pretend this never happened. But she knew he wouldn't let it go that easily. He would probably make jokes about it for the rest of the evening, and she would still have to serve his table. Plus, she really needed that money. Maya took a deep breath and sat down on the piano bench. The leather was soft and expensive, nothing like the hard wooden bench her grandmother had at home. She placed her hands on her lap and looked down at the keys. They were beautiful, perfectly white and clean, arranged in the familiar pattern she had memorized as a child. For a moment, she forgot about Richard and his friends, forgot about the watching crowd, forgot about everything except the music that lived in her memory. "Well?" Richard called out impatiently. "Are you going to play something or just sit there all night?" Maya's hands were shaking slightly as she lifted them toward the keys. She could hear her grandmother's voice in her head, as clear as if she were sitting right beside her. "When you sit down to play, baby girl, you don't play for other people. You play for the music itself. You play because the music needs to come out of you and you're the only one who can let it free." Maya closed her eyes and let her fingers find their first position on the keys. She had planned to play something simple, something safe that wouldn't draw too much attention. Maybe a basic melody that would satisfy Richard's request without making too much of a scene. But as her fingers touched the keys, something unexpected happened. The music seemed to wake up inside her, stretching and stirring after years of being locked away. She felt a connection to the piano that she hadn't experienced since her grandmother died. Behind her, she could hear Richard tapping his foot impatiently. "Come on," he said. "We don't have all night." Maya opened her eyes and looked at the keys again. She thought about all the hours she had spent practicing with her grandmother, all the lessons about letting the music tell its own story, all the encouragement to never be afraid of letting her talent show. What if she didn't play something simple? What if she played something real? The thought scared her, but it also excited her in a way she hadn't felt in years. She had been hiding her music for so long, keeping it buried under work schedules and financial worries and the constant stress of just surviving. But here was a piano, a beautiful instrument that was just waiting for someone to bring it to life. And here was Maya, with all her grandmother's lessons still living in her fingers, still flowing in her blood. She looked back at Richard, who was checking his watch and looking annoyed. His friends were still holding their phones ready to record. What they expected would be an embarrassing performance. They had no idea what was about to happen. Maya turned back to the piano and placed her hands on the keys properly this time. She felt the smooth, cool surface under her fingertips and remembered the feeling of music flowing through her hands, through her whole body, connecting her to something bigger than herself. The restaurant was completely quiet now. Even the kitchen noise had stopped, as if the whole world was holding its breath waiting to see what would happen next. Maya thought about her grandmother one more time, remembered the way she used to smile when Maya played something particularly well. "That's it, baby girl," she would say. "That's the music talking through you." And then Maya began to play. The first notes were soft and gentle, like a whisper in the quiet restaurant. Maya had chosen to start with a piece her grandmother had taught her years ago, a classical melody that began simply, but grew more complex as it developed. She could feel the tension in her shoulders starting to relax as her fingers remembered their old patterns. The muscle memory was still there, waiting to be awakened. Each note felt familiar and comfortable, like greeting an old friend after a long absence. Behind her, she heard Richard make a small sound of surprise. He had expected her to stumble through a simple tune, not begin with something that actually sounded like real music. But Maya was just getting started. As the melody developed, she began to add her own touches, small improvisations that her grandmother had encouraged her to explore. The music began to take on a life of its own, flowing and changing like a living thing. Maya felt herself getting lost in the sound, the way she used to when she was young, and the world was full of possibilities. Her fingers moved across the keys, with growing confidence, finding harmonies and rhythms that she had almost forgotten she knew. The simple classical piece began to transform into something more complex, more personal. Maya found herself weaving in elements of jazz and blues, styles her grandmother had introduced her to when she was older. The music became a conversation between different genres, different emotions, different parts of Maya's own story. She could feel the restaurant's attention shifting from casual curiosity to genuine interest. The quality of the silence had changed from skeptical waiting to respectful listening. Maya's eyes were closed now, and she was completely absorbed in the music. She played through her exhaustion from long days at work, through her worry about money and her love for her brother. She played through her grief for her parents and her longing for her grandmother's guidance. The music became bigger and more powerful, filling the restaurant with sound that was both beautiful and deeply emotional. Maya felt like she was having a conversation with the piano itself, each note leading naturally to the next, each phrase building on what came before. Behind her, Richard's friends had stopped laughing. She could sense the change in the room's atmosphere, could feel the surprise and growing respect of the audience she couldn't see. But Maya wasn't playing for them anymore. She was playing for herself, for her grandmother, for the music that had been waiting patiently inside her all these years, and she was just getting warmed up. As Maya's fingers continued to dance across the keys, something magical began to happen in the restaurant. The music wasn't just background noise anymore, it was becoming the main event. Every conversation had stopped. Every fork had been set down. Even the servers had paused in their work to listen. Maya could feel the change in the room's energy, but she was too deep in the music to fully understand what was happening. Her fingers moved with a confidence she hadn't felt in years. shifting from the classical melody into a smooth jazz rhythm that made the piano sing in ways she had almost forgotten were possible. Behind her, Richard's smug expression was slowly melting away. He had expected to watch a clumsy performance that would give him and his friends something to laugh about for weeks. Instead, he was hearing music that was making him question everything he thought he knew about the young woman serving his table. "Is that really her playing?" one of his friends whispered, lowering his phone without realizing it. Richard didn't answer. He couldn't. He was too shocked by what he was hearing to form words. Maya's music began to tell a story. It started with the gentle, hopeful melody of childhood dreams, the kind of music her grandmother used to play on Sunday mornings when the whole house felt peaceful and full of possibilities. But then the melody grew more complex, adding layers of struggle and determination that spoke of long nights and hard work. An elderly couple at table 3 had tears in their eyes. The woman reached across the table and took her husband's hand, remembering their own young struggles decades ago. At table 8, a businessman who had been checking his emails all evening put his phone away and really listened to music for the first time in months. Even the kitchen staff had stopped what they were doing. The chef, a stern man who rarely showed emotion, was standing in the doorway with his arms crossed, nodding slowly to the rhythm. The dishwashers had turned off their machines so they could hear better. Maya's performance shifted again, moving into a blues progression that seemed to capture every difficult moment she had lived through. The death of her parents, the responsibility of raising her brother, the endless worry about money. It was all there in the music, transformed into something beautiful instead of just painful. Her fingers found a melody that spoke of love and sacrifice, of choosing to put someone else's dreams before your own. This was the music of working double shifts and counting every penny, of staying strong when you wanted to fall apart, of finding hope in the darkest moments. A young mother at table 12 was thinking about her own daughter, wondering what dreams she might be hiding, what talents she might never get the chance to share with the world. A college student working as a server across the room was fighting back tears, recognizing her own struggles in Maya's music. But Maya wasn't finished yet. As the blues melody reached its emotional peak, she began to weave in something new, a sound that was pure hope, pure possibility. Her grandmother had called it tomorrow music, the kind of melody that reminded you that no matter how hard today was, tomorrow could be different. The music grew stronger and more confident, filling every corner of the restaurant with sound that seemed to lift everyone who heard it. Maya's technique was flawless, but more than that, her performance had soul. It had life. It had truth. Richard was staring at Maya's back in complete disbelief. This was not what he had planned. He had wanted to humiliate her, to put her in her place, to remind everyone in the restaurant about the difference between people like him and people like her. Instead, she was making him look foolish. She was showing everyone in the room that he had completely misjudged her, that his assumptions about her were ignorant and wrong, but it was too late to stop her now. The entire restaurant was captivated, and Richard realized that interrupting this performance would make him look even worse than he already did. Maya's music continued to evolve, moving through different styles and emotions like a master storyteller moving through chapters of an epic tale. She played classical passages with the precision of a conservatory graduate, then shifted into jazz improvisation that would have impressed professional musicians. At table 15, a music teacher was shaking her head in amazement. She had been playing piano for 30 years, and she recognized the level of skill and natural talent she was witnessing. This wasn't someone who had taken a few lessons. This was someone with real training and genuine gift. Where did she learn to play like that? The music teacher whispered to her companion. Maya's performance was reaching its climax now. The music had built through all the emotions of her story, the sadness, the struggle, the determination, the love, and now it was reaching toward something transcendent. Her fingers flew across the keys in a passage that combined everything she had played before into one magnificent musical statement. It was classical and jazz and blues and gospel all at once, but somehow it all fit together perfectly, like pieces of a puzzle finally finding their proper places. The sound filled the restaurant so completely that it seemed to be coming from everywhere at once. People weren't just hearing the music, they were feeling it in their bones, in their hearts, in places they hadn't realized music could reach. A businessman who hadn't thought about his childhood piano lessons in 20 years was remembering why he had loved music before life got complicated. A teenager on a date was realizing that there was more to art and beauty than she had ever imagined. Even the restaurant sound system seemed unnecessary. Maya's piano was providing all the music anyone could need. Richard's friends had completely forgotten about recording the performance for their amusement. They were too stunned by what they were hearing to think about anything except the music itself. "Richard," one of them said quietly, "I don't think she's just a waitress." Richard said nothing. He was beginning to understand that he had made a terrible mistake, but he was too proud to admit it, even to himself. Maya's music began to slow down, not because she was getting tired, but because the story she was telling was reaching its conclusion. The melody became gentler again, but it was different from the gentle music she had started with. This gentleness had strength in it, the kind of peace that comes after surviving something difficult. She played a final passage that seemed to hover in the air like a question. What comes next? What happens when the music ends and real life begins? Again? And then, with a series of soft, perfect notes that seemed to float rather than strike the keys, Maya brought her performance to a close. The silence that followed was unlike anything the restaurant had ever experienced. It wasn't the awkward quiet of people not knowing what to say. It was the profound silence of people who had just experienced something extraordinary and needed a moment to understand what had happened to them. Maya sat at the piano bench with her hands still resting on the keys, breathing heavily from the emotional intensity of what she had just shared. She had poured years of hidden feelings into that performance, and now she felt both exhausted and strangely peaceful. Slowly, she became aware of the silence around her and remembered where she was. She was still in Grandview Restaurant. Still, wearing her waitress uniform, still surrounded by customers who had expected her to embarrass herself. Maya turned around slowly to face the room, not sure what she would see in all those watching faces. Maya turned around slowly, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. The restaurant was completely silent, and for a terrifying moment, she wondered if she had made a huge mistake. Maybe her performance hadn't been as good as it felt. Maybe she had embarrassed herself after all. But then she saw their faces. Every single person in the restaurant was staring at her with expressions of pure amazement. Some people had their mouths open. Others had tears in their eyes. The elderly couple at table 3 was holding hands and smiling at her like she had just given them the most precious gift in the world. And then it started. One person began to clap. Then another. Then another. Within seconds, the entire restaurant erupted in the loudest, most enthusiastic applause Maya had ever heard in her life. People weren't just clapping. They were standing up, cheering, whistling, shouting words of praise and encouragement. Maya felt tears starting to form in her eyes. She had never experienced anything like this. All her life, her music had been something private, something she shared only with her grandmother, and later kept locked away inside herself. She had never imagined that her playing could move other people this way. The applause went on and on. People seemed unable to stop clapping, as if they were trying to pour all their amazement and gratitude into the sound of their hands coming together. The kitchen staff had come out of the back, clapping and cheering along with everyone else. Maya stood up from the piano bench on shaky legs and tried to smile, but the tears in her eyes made it hard to see clearly. She looked around the room, at all these people who had been strangers just minutes ago, but now felt like they had shared something incredibly special with her. "That was incredible," someone shouted from across the room. "Amazing," called out someone else. "Where did you learn to play like that?" asked a woman at a nearby table. Maya wiped her eyes and tried to find her voice. "My grandmother taught me," she said, though she wasn't sure if anyone could hear her over the continuing applause. But her words seemed to carry, because the clapping gradually began to quiet down as people leaned forward to listen to what she had to say. "My grandmother was a piano teacher," Maya continued, her voice getting stronger. "She taught me everything I know about music, She always said that music was meant to be shared, but I haven't played for anyone in years. The restaurant was quiet again, but it was a warm, attentive quiet, completely different from the uncomfortable silence that had filled the room earlier. "Well, you should be playing for people every day," said a man in an expensive suit who was sitting near the front. That was extraordinary. Maya was about to respond when she noticed someone approaching from the corner of the restaurant. It was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and silver hair, dressed in an elegant black dress that suggested she was someone important. "Excuse me," the woman said as she reached Maya. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I had to come speak with you. I'm Carol Henderson. I work for Blue Note Records." Maya's heart stopped. Blue Note Records was one of the most famous music labels in the country. She had grown up listening to albums with that name on them. "I was having dinner with my husband tonight," Carol continued, "and I have to tell you, what you just did was one of the most moving musical performances I've heard in years. Have you ever thought about making music professionally?" Maya felt like she was dreaming. I work here," she said, as if that explained everything. Carol smiled. "I can see that, but I think you could do much more than work here if you wanted to. Would you be interested in coming to our studio next week? I'd love to have our team hear you play." Maya's mind was spinning. A record deal? A professional music career? These were things that happened to other people, not to waitresses who played. "Piano is a hobby. I don't know what to say," Maya whispered. "Say yes," called out someone from the audience, and suddenly everyone was encouraging her again. "Do it. You have to. This is your chance." Maya looked around the room at all these strangers who were suddenly invested in her future, and she felt overwhelmed by their support and enthusiasm. While this was happening, Richard had been sitting at his table in complete shock. The confident, mocking expression had disappeared from his face entirely. He was staring at Maya like he was seeing her for the first time, which, in many ways, he was. His friends were no longer laughing or making jokes. They looked embarrassed and uncomfortable, finally understanding how wrong they had been about Maya and how poorly their leader had behaved. "Richard," one of them said quietly, "maybe we should just pay the bill and leave." But Richard was still staring at Maya, who was now talking excitedly with Carol Henderson about the possibility of a recording contract. He was beginning to realize the full impact of what he had done and what it meant. He had tried to humiliate a young woman who was struggling to make ends meet, working multiple jobs to support her family. Instead, he had accidentally given her the platform she needed to change her entire life. But more than that, he was forced to confront his own prejudices and assumptions. He had looked at Maya and seen only a waitress, someone he considered beneath his notice except when he needed service. He had never considered that she might be a real person with dreams, talents, and a story worth knowing. The woman he had tried to mock was more talented than anyone else in the restaurant, probably more talented than anyone he knew personally. She had turned his cruel joke into a moment of beauty that had moved an entire room full of people to tears. Richard felt something he hadn't experienced in years: genuine shame. Slowly, he stood up from his table and walked toward Maya, who was still talking with Carol Henderson. The room gradually became quiet again as people noticed him approaching. Maya saw him coming and felt her stomach tighten. She wasn't sure what he was going to say, but she braced herself for more cruelty. Instead, Richard stopped a few feet away from her and did something no one expected. He pulled out his wallet and took out all the cash he had with him, much more than the $150 he had originally offered. "I owe you an apology," he said, his voice much quieter than it had been earlier. "And I owe you more than money can repay. What I did tonight was wrong, and you responded with more grace and talent than I deserved to witness." He held out the money to Maya, but she hesitated to take it. "This isn't payment for playing," Richard continued. "This is an apology for my behavior and a small way of saying thank you for teaching me something important tonight." Maya looked at the money, then at Richard's face. She could see that his apology was genuine, that he really did understand how wrong he had been. "Thank you," she said simply, taking the money. Richard nodded and turned to leave. But Maya called, "After him." "Mr. Richard?" He turned back. Music really can change people, she said. My grandmother always told me that. Tonight I think I finally understand what she meant. Richard looked at her for a long moment, then nodded again and walked back to his table, where his friends were waiting with very different expressions than they had worn earlier in the evening. As Richard and his group quietly paid their bill and left the restaurant, the focus returned to Maya and her amazing opportunity with Blue Note Records. Carol Henderson was explaining what the next steps would be, and other customers were coming forward to congratulate Maya and share their own stories about how her music had affected them. Rita, the other waitress, came over with tears in her eyes and gave Maya a huge hug. "I can't believe this is happening," she said. "I mean, I can believe it because you're amazing, but I can't believe it's happening right here at work." Maya's manager, who had watched the entire evening unfold, approached her with a mixture of pride and sadness on his face. "Maya," he said, "I have a feeling I'm about to lose my best waitress." Maya looked around the restaurant that had been her workplace for 6 months, at the piano that had just changed her life, at all the people who had shared this incredible moment with her. "I think you might be right," she said, smiling through her tears. As the evening wound down and the last customers left the restaurant, Maya sat at the piano one more time. She played a soft, gentle melody, a thank you song for her grandmother, for the music that had never left her, and for the unexpected moment that had opened a door to a future she had never dared to imagine. Tomorrow she would call David and tell him the good news. Tomorrow she would go to Blue Note Records and see what possibilities awaited her. Tomorrow her life would begin to change in ways she was only starting to understand. But tonight, she was just grateful. Grateful for music, for second chances, and for the reminder that sometimes the most beautiful moments come from the most unexpected places.